Hi friends, welcome back to my channel and happy Bookmas Day 6. Today's video is going to be my top 24 books from 2024. I'm so excited. I love talking about my favorite books. That's my favorite thing. We've got a real cozy vibe going on tonight. I've got lamp lighting in the corner. It's snowing outside, you can't really tell. And I've got all my favorite books that I want to talk to you about that I read this year. Make sure you are subscribed so you don't miss any more Bookmas videos from me. We've still got half of the month to go. I'm posting every other day this month. And leave me a comment down below letting me know what your absolute favorite book of 2024 was. And without further ado, let's get into the video. I was gonna go through these by star rating. This is pretty much all of my 4 and 5 star reads that, looking back, I really loved. But I've decided that I want to talk about these in chronological order of when I read them. So, starting with January. The first book that I want to talk about today is Small Worlds by Caleb Azuma Nelson. He is one of my absolute favorite authors ever. He wrote a book called Open Water, which I loved, and this was a new release from 2023 that I read in January, and I tabbed it and underlined, highlighted stuff. I just loved the writing in this book. The dust jacket says this is an exhilarating and expansive story about fathers and sons, faith and friendship, and it's set over the course of 3 summers. So this is a book that I would recommend for the summertime, even though I read it in January. It takes place in the summer, but the writing in this is so incredible, and it's really just about human relationships and everybody's small world that they're a part of. Next, in January, I read The Storied Life of A.J. Fikry. This is by Gabrielle Zevin, and this is an adorable story about a bookshop owner who one day opens his door and there's something on his doorstep that pretty much changes his life. And it was such a sweet story. It was a very quick book, and it was kind of heartbreaking also, but it was super beautiful. And this one I was really surprised by, especially because I didn't love Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow as much as I thought I would. So that one was for sure one of my favorites of the year. The next book on this list, which upon reflection, unless I read something amazing in the month of December that can top this, which I don't believe is possible, is my favorite book of the entire year. Hard decision to make, but this book is so important to me. It is Babel by R.F. Kuang. If you read this book and you loved it, you know that this book is genius. It's one of the smartest books I've ever read. The writing is incredible. The story is fantastic. The characters are very complex and very interesting, and I loved reading about them. And it's about these students that go to Oxford, and they are all there to learn translation, but in this world, translation powers things. You do translation on these little gold blocks, and those little gold blocks power things like the lights or the carriages. So it's set in like the 1800s, but it's fantasy. So it's a historical fantasy, dark academia. Oh my god, this book was so good. I'm so excited to reread this one forever and ever and ever, but this one pretty sure was my favorite book of the entire year. The next book on this list is Know My Name by Chanel Miller, and I actually read this in a video that I made in January, which was reading my highest and lowest rated books on Goodreads, and this was the highest rated book on my Goodreads TBR. It lived up to that for sure. It's not an easy read. It's about a woman who was sexually assaulted, and it's sort of her testimony in a way to reclaim her name and her story, and it was very powerful. Definitely super heavy content, but it was really well done, and she's a great author. So I'm excited to see what she writes next. I think she's writing a children's book right now, but I know that like her debut into the writing world was a memoir about this very devastating, difficult thing that happened in her life, but it was really well done. So I'm excited to read more of her stuff someday when she publishes other things too. Next book on this list is None of This Is True by Lisa Jewell. This is a mystery novel which was about a woman who ends up on a podcast with another woman because they have the same birthday, I'm pretty sure. Somebody's lying, and you are reading this book the whole time being like, what is real? Who's lying? It all seems real, but you're not really sure what is. And also, how do I explain it? It's basically written out like a Netflix documentary about it, and then there are the podcast clips added in. I did not listen to this, but I've heard and I can definitely imagine that the audiobook for this one is amazing, so would definitely recommend that. This one, I read the last 200 pages in one sitting, and if that happens to you, the book, I'm probably gonna rate it very highly. Next book on here is another memoir, which is Crying in H Mart by Michelle Zauner. I listened to this, so it was great because I got her voice telling me her story. It's about a woman whose mother dies of cancer, and it's talking about her relationship with her mother in the time that her mother was alive and what it was like to experience losing her mother. And it was for sure very heavy, but it was beautifully written. It was a beautiful story, and I really enjoyed listening to the audiobook and hearing her voice as well. Next book is The Kite Runner by Khalid Hosseini. I've never read anything by him before, but this one was very, very good. It was a story about a young boy who, this is testing my memory skills, who lived in Afghanistan and moved to the US, and it's talking about his childhood a little bit and what's going on in his life present day, and it was just a really beautifully written story, and I'm really excited to read A Thousand Splendid Suns, which if you watched my last video, you would know is on my top TBR for 2025. Next book on the list is Transcendent Kingdom. This author also wrote one of my all-time favorite books, Homegoing, which is phenomenal. I love that book so much. This is a story about a woman who's studying neuroscience at Stanford, but is dealing with a lot of stuff in her family. Her brother died of an overdose when she was younger, and her mother is in a horrible depression pretty much, and she carries a lot of this on her shoulders, and what she is studying for her PhD is very relevant to what she has experienced in her life, but she's not really ready to face that yet. So I thought the writing in this one was amazing. This story was really interesting, and it was awesome to read the character growth in this book, but I just love this author so much. Next book on the list is The Wager. This is probably the most surprising read of the year because I did not expect to love this one as much as I did. I knew I would probably enjoy it because I heard so much high praise about this book at the end of last year, and it is a nonfiction story about a shipwreck that happened in the 1600s, but it's told in a narrative style, so it's very interesting, reads like fiction. If you are trying to get into nonfiction, I would definitely recommend this book because it flew by. I did not think I would ever care about a shipwreck, these random people that happened in the 1600s, but I was gripped the entire time. I had to know what would happen next. So that's why I loved this one so much. The audiobook was really good for this one too. Next is by one of my favorite authors ever, Richard Powers. I read 2 of his books this year, and you'll see the other one later on in this list. This is a story about a father and son who lose their wife / mother respectively, and this is basically a story about grief, about father-son relationships, about the environment, about space, and it's set in a pretty much present timeline, left a little bit up to the reader's interpretation of when it is, but it was a beautiful story. Definitely sad. I would look up trigger warnings if that is important to you, but this one and all of Richard Powers' books are just phenomenal. He writes about nature and humans in such a beautiful way. I cannot get enough. I'm excited to read more of his backlist. Next on my list, of course, is Funny Story. This is probably my favorite Emily Henry book, and I am saying that because I think it really resonated with me in the time that I read it, and I felt that way about Happy Place when I read it. I just love Emily Henry. I think she's so talented at writing romance novels that are pretty much women's fiction, and this is a story about a woman who is in a relationship with someone. She moves to this place for that person, and then the relationship ends and she's trying to find herself, and the romance was really fun, but I loved her storyline of trying to find her place in her community without her partner, and I just love that book so much, and I'm so excited for her book to come out next year. I just love Emily Henry so much. That book I read in April. I don't have another like amazing fun read until June. The first one on this list is Empire of Storms, and the second one on this list for June is Kingdom of Ash. These 2 books are my favorite books from the Throne of Glass series. I would say the whole Throne of Glass series, but honestly, these 2 books rates so much higher in my mind than the books at the beginning of the series, which I enjoyed, don't get me wrong. But once you get into those books and you know all the characters, you're like so connected to their stories and their like found family situation and what's going on, it's just incredible. Like those two books especially, I wish I could go back and read them for the first time again. So those for sure are my favorite Sarah J Maas books. And then also I feel like this is an unpopular opinion, but A Court of Silver Flames. I think those are my top 3. The next book that I rated very highly in June was Detransition Baby. I read this for book club in June, and let me just say, fantastic book club book because we had lots to say. I've never had so much book discussion happening in the full hour of book club. This is a story about these 3 people that are sort of deciding if they want to have a baby, but the situation is unique because 2 of them used to be in a relationship, they broke up, one of them is in a new relationship, and the one that isn't in a relationship has detransitioned. Ames was a trans woman and detransitioned to be a man. The concept was really interesting to me because it's not something that I've ever heard of happening, but it definitely was like a put yourself in someone else's shoes story, and I feel like the author made it very approachable to do that, but not in a way that was like over-explanatory and designed for a straight person to read. Like this book is written through a trans lens, which is why I enjoyed it so much, because it was an authentic experience of putting yourself in someone else's shoes. So would definitely recommend this book. It was really, really good. And also this cover is amazing. Okay, next book, which I loved, I've been thinking about this pretty much since I read it, was Bright Young Women. This is a story about the Ted Bundy murders. And it's sort of like a Last Girl story almost. It's about this girl who was there and was friends with his last 2 victims, and it sort of went through the whole process of what happened afterwards. Like it starts off right at the event and then goes through all the aftermath of it, but it was really good and freaky, but well done, I thought. Okay, next book is The Berry Pickers. I read this one for book club. Honestly, a lot of books on here I read for book club, which means we picked good books this year, but this is a story set in Maine about a 4-year-old girl who goes missing from an indigenous reservation, and then it follows the family in the aftermath, and there's much more to the book than that. I don't want to give anything away. The writing was really well done, and I thought that it was just the right length, and the story was really interesting, and I just really enjoyed this one. Yeah, I thought this one was really good. The next book on my list is The Ballad of Jacquot Delahaye, which is a story about a female pirate from the Dominican Republic. It's set in the 1600s, I think, and it was so fun. There was a romance, there was found family, there was adventure, there was death, lots happened, but it was a historical fiction book that I kind of found just like on Goodreads somewhere, and I'm so glad I did because it was really, really fun. If you're looking for like a pirate adventure story that was based on a real person, definitely put this one in your TBR. Next book is God of the Woods. This is a story about 2 siblings that disappear in different years at the same summer camp, and you're getting parallel timelines of what happened to them and all of the characters trying to find them, and it was super atmospheric, very eerie. I loved reading it like late summer, early fall. It was like the perfect time to read this book, and I did not predict the ending at all. This one I would definitely recommend for a late summer read to put on your TBR for next year. The next book on here is Playground by Richard Powers, which is his newest release. This is like the Overstory but underwater, and if you don't know what the Overstory is about, then what are you doing? That's like one of my favorite books of all time. But Richard Powers, like I said, writes about nature in such an alluring way. He is just so good at description and bringing you to the place, and at the same time his books are about humans, not about nature, and you get these wonderful nature descriptions and setting and all of that stuff, but you're really reading about human relationships and the human experience, and that's pretty much what this book was about, just underwater. The Overstory is about trees and land with those themes. So this one follows 4 different characters, and I adored this book. I just love Richard Powers. His writing style and my taste completely align. So next book on my list is The Water Dancer, another author that I love. This is a historical fiction book about a slave named Hiram who escapes slavery and then becomes involved with the Underground Railroad, but there's some sort of element of sci-fi magical stuff. Very minimal, but it definitely added to the story, and I thought that this was an amazing historical fiction because I was in his shoes. I think that's the best thing that a historical fiction author can do, is place you in the character's shoes, and this one did a fantastic job of that. Okay, hair's coming down. All right, the next book, as you can tell by all of these tabs, that I loved so much this year was The Secret Life of Bees. This is another surprise for me. I thought that I would enjoy this, but I didn't think I would enjoy it as much as I did. The writing in this book was amazing, like absolute master of show don't tell, and I thought that the main characters were so lovely to follow. It's a story about a young girl who's from South Carolina, and it's set in 1964, and she pretty much runs away from her father's house with her nanny, and this nanny is like a maternal figure for her because her mother passed away when she was very young, and then she ends up on a honey farm a little bit north in South Carolina, and it was just a beautiful story, and as you can tell, I loved it a lot. Next book, which is right up there with my absolute favorite of the year, was The Nightingale. This book was beautiful, and I knew it would be. Everybody said it was an amazing book, and it's been on my TBR forever. Finally got to it this year, and thank God I did. I'm so excited to read more Kristen Hanna, but she is just an incredible storyteller. She's so good, just like that book by Ta-Nehisi Coates, at bringing you to the character's experience and putting you in their shoes. And this is a World War II story about two sisters that are dealing with the war in different ways. They're from France, and it's set during the Nazi occupation in France, and it's based on a true story. And Kristen Hanna writes these stories about women that we don't know or hear as often in history, and I love that. So if you haven't read this book, consider it your sign to read it. And it's a little chunky, but I read this in a couple days, so it's not really that bad. Don't be intimidated by the length of it. Second to last book on here, which I read in November, was The Martian. If you haven't heard me talk about this book yet, I loved it. It was amazing. The main character was really funny. He basically gets stuck on Mars, and his crew leaves because they thought he died, and he didn't, and he has to survive on Mars, and this whole book is him just like trying to figure out how to survive. The book was amazing. The movie was really fun. The movie left out a lot of the scheming sort of stuff, planning stuff he does in the book, so if you've seen the movie and not read the book, I would recommend reading the book, but if you haven't done either, read the book first and then watch the movie. But fantastic book, totally had my attention the whole way through. The last and most recent book that I read in 2024 that's on this list of my top 24 books of 2024 is The Book of Form and Emptiness. This book was amazing. I loved it. It's such a smart book. The story was so beautiful. It's about a young boy and his mother, and his dad passes away in kind of a freak accident situation, and they both are dealing with grief in different ways, and he starts hearing voices. His mother starts collecting things and becomes a hoarder, and the way that this story was told was so genius. The quotes in here are amazing. The writing, which is really what I mean by the quotes, was phenomenal, and I just love Ruth Ozeki. I'm so excited to read more of her stuff. But that is the last book I have on this list. I have read 113 books as of today, and I had no problem picking 24, which means that at least 25% of the books I read were 4.5 stars or above, which is such a win for me compared to the reading I was doing last year. So I'm really happy with my reading year. I'm hoping to find even more 5 stars in 2025. Again, let me know in the comments what your favorite book was of this year. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. Make sure you are subscribed, and I will see you guys on the next day of BOOKMAS. Bye, friends.